The bobber, aka the float, also known as the float. When we think about fishing with bobbers, you think mostly about kids, beginner fishermen, fishing with worms, catching panfish. But it's not just for that. There's many times when a bobber can be very useful for catching bass. First instance here would be one when fish are inactive. Now this is mostly going to be when the water's cold, but it can also be when the water's really hot and the fish are just not moving around much and they don't want to chase. Number two, cold water kind of goes with the first one. Up here in the upper half of the country, you get real cold water in the winter time, and that's when you need to use either a vertical presentation or a bobber. And that rolls into number three with the vertical presentation. You want to present that lure straight down, keep it in that front of that fish, and just keep it in place there until he finally decides to eat it. We go into number four here, when you need to make longer casts with a light lure. So you're fishing a real small jig or something, and you want to get it out there where the fish are schooled, and you can't do it with your regular setup, so you need to add that bobber so you can get some more weight and cast that lure out further. Number five, another time people think about fishing a bobber is with live baits. Shiner fishing in Florida would be a great example. Well known for catching a lot of big bass. So that's sometimes when you can use a bobber. Now what kind of baits should you use? Some of my favorite baits include feather jigs. Can be real deadly in cold water. They're also really good for crappie and bluegill fishing. Got some real big bass on them, up to 6.5, 7 pounds. Bucktail jigs go right in with the feather jigs. It's the same kind of thing. You can use different sizes depending on the forage that's in your lake or reservoir or wherever you're fishing. And these can be really effective for largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth as well. Leech imitations can be really good. The black, rig these up on a jig head, usually 1/8 ounce, but that can vary depending on the depth of the water you're fishing and the size of the bait that you're using. I also like to use really small worms, 2-inch to 4-inch worms. Gonna be straight-tailed type worms. This is a good time where you can use those finesse worms that you ripped up earlier in the year. Just take like a couple-inch section off the back and use them on a jig head, and they'll work really well. Small tube jigs can also be really good underneath a bobber, like the Spitsy Bug tube here, rigged up with the jig head. So that's some of the baits that you can use, not all of them. Get creative. There's all kinds of different things you could try. So that's enough on the when and the how and what baits to throw. Let's get into some actual fish catches and show you what these baits can do. So this is in February in Nebraska. Got some wind blowing. That's another thing. You can use this as a secondary pull a lot of times if you can use more than one pull in the state that you're fishing in. And so a lot of times when there's wind, I'll throw one of these baits out underneath the bobber and just let it bob in the wind while I'm fishing a crankbait or something else and catch a lot of extra bonus fish. And in this case, I've got a really big fish on here. I believe this was the big fish of this day. Another master angler size largemouth. So people will say, oh sure, you'll catch fish, but they'll all be small. Well, not necessarily. These baits and these techniques will catch some big fish. And that is a nice one right there. Got it on a little 2-inch Senko on an 1/8 ounce jig head. And that is a big fat bellied Nebraska largemouth there. So I hooked this fish up to get a weight on it. And a lot of times when the water's really cold, these bigger largemouth bass will eat some really small forage. So that makes it a great time to try fishing with bobbers and small feather jigs or little worms. It's amazing how big a fish you can catch on a really tiny little bait. So get a measurement on this fish. It's 20.5 inches long. A really nice bass from Nebraska. It's a master angler size bass. Here in the state, they got to be 20 inches or 5 pounds. So that's a fish I probably wouldn't have caught if I hadn't been using a bobber and one of these smaller baits. I've been catching some big ones on a crankbait the day before, and got that big one on the little worm there. So all these fish catches are going to be with a 1/8 ounce jig head and a little 2-inch Senko worm. And I usually rig that straight on the hook, just thread it right on the hook. But sometimes I'll wacky rig it and just hook it in the middle. And sometimes that gives it a little extra action and it gets a lot more bites. So enjoy the rest of the fish catches, and we'll catch you at the end of the video.